Hey, everybody, this is Dan with Pain Free You. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Tamara from the Bay Area of California, USA. And she volunteered to share her success story with CRPS. And so, welcome, Tamara.
Hello.
Um, so, so thank you again for doing this. This is great. There's a lot of people with CRPS who are suffering a lot, and to hear that there is a way to recover from that is wonderful. So why don't you tell us a little bit of your story and what you experienced, both, when you first came down with symptoms, what led into that, what you dealt with in the medical world, and then how you kind of figured your way out of the diagnosis of CRPS and how you're doing now. So tell us a story.
Sure. So it started 8 years ago, almost to a day, in the fall of 2015. I woke up one day and I found my left arm swollen, mostly around the wrist, and it was extremely painful. And the wrist was somewhat limited in mobility. And at first I was really frightened. Then I thought, well, it will go away. I'm generally fairly healthy, not a big deal. But it didn't go away. So I went to the doctor. The doctor looked at it and he said, oh, you've got carpal tunnel syndrome. You just need to use the brace and rest your wrist and you will be okay.
Right.
So I did exactly that. I gave my wrist a lot of rest. The only thing that was puzzling to me was that the doctor insisted that it was RSI, repetitive stress injury, and I didn't have any repetitive stress. We kept digging, and then I finally kind of surrendered. I said, well, a couple of weeks ago, I was scraping paint on my deck, and she goes, oh, yeah, that's what it was. And I said, well, I really hated doing it so much. I wouldn't do it for more than 10, 15 minutes a day. So it took me like several days of pretty laid back effort, and it couldn't be RSI. She said, no, this is RSI. So I just said, okay, I'll do what you tell me. And I incidentally went on a very long vacation after, which means that I didn't have to type on the computer. I didn't have to do anything with my wrist. And then all of a sudden on vacation, it started spiraling completely, just going down. So what happened was my left hand developed what they call claw hand, when the fingers curled in and I couldn't straighten it out and I couldn't make a fist. So they were kind of stuck in that semi, bent position.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, that's what it was. And then the pain really developed into neuropathy, and I didn't know what neuropathy was. I had no idea what neuropathic pain is. All I knew was that I'm pretty tolerant to pain. That was the worst pain I ever experienced in my life. And it was throbbing. It was just there day and night, and it would get a little better during the day, and then it would be absolutely terrifying at night. And then within about a month and a half after it started, the pain jumped on the second hand, and then my second hand got sort of clawed in, and neuropathy. And then the pain started moving up the hands and into arms and started spreading into my upper back. So the whole thing. And simultaneously, I was going doctor to doctor, trying to figure out what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I will imagine a lot of your viewers, listeners, can repeat the story. Neurologist, rheumatologist, cardiovascular specialist because eventually I ended up with some pretty severe Raynaud syndrome outbreaks when my hand would turn white, purple, blue, whatever.
Mhm.
And and I would just stick it into hot water and it would not help. And so it was just awful. So they all were looking for something and they couldn't find anything except they did the electromagnetic test, and the neurologist told me, you see, there is this absolute, totally terrible degradation of electric signals in your hand, which means that you are totally surely having carpal tunnel syndrome. And the only way to deal with it, we can try steroids. And then if that doesn't help, we can use surgery. And I asked him, first of all, how certain you are of this diagnosis?
Right.
And he said, well, 75% certain. And I asked, what about that other 25%? And he said, well, 75 is more than 25, correct? And I said, well, that is correct. And then I asked him, would that surgery fix my claw hands? Because I literally started using dexterity in my hands. I could not drive. I had to use grip gloves so I could hold on to the steering wheel. You know, the doors with the round knob. I had to use grip gloves in order to turn the knob on my own front door. So all things like that, I couldn't write. At some point, I realized that I can't sign a check. I just couldn't put a signature on anything. And somehow in that condition, I continued to somewhat function. After the official medicine, I went to acupressurist, to acupuncturist. I paid many thousands of dollars to the acupuncturist. And until I realized that he really didn't know what to do about me. And then my friend who was my acupressurist, incidentally, she said, there is this book, there is this doctor in New York, his name is John Sarno, and he wrote this book about back pain. And I said, well, back is the only thing that doesn't hurt at the moment. So why would I read his book? And she said, they're saying that it helps even those who have other kind of chronic pain. And I completely ignored that. And then a couple months later, when I was lying on her table, she brought up Sarno again. And by then I was desperate enough. I was ready to try just about anything. So I went home and I got the book from Amazon.
Sure.
And as pretty much everybody who used Sarno's method, I saw myself on every page of the book. And this is when it finally dawned on me that I have to revisit the way I live my life. So I'm a typical Sarno, what he calls TMS personality, driven, perfectionist, go. I have to do something every minute of my day. I viewed any kind of rest as letting myself down, all those things. Right up front, I started looking, I started trying the traditional Sarno method, which is look back, find that childhood trauma, and then your pain will go away. Well, that did not work. I tried that for several months, and I went to a psychologist, and none of that worked. And eventually, I found what really, really worked for me, and that was meditation. Okay. And meditation is what got me out of the condition when I was seriously considering disability, because I just couldn't function. I couldn't type, I couldn't write, I couldn't drive, I couldn't cook, I couldn't use knife or fork. I remember one morning I woke up getting ready for work, and I tried to cut a slice of pretty soft cheese that I had for breakfast, and I couldn't. And I remember I just broke down and I was crying and I was biting off of the big slab of cheese, and mostly thinking, what am I going to do
Sure.
with my life?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so it took me 2 very, very long years. And guess what? My life now is much better than it was in the years preceding my CRPS, because I learned what emotional hygiene is. I learned how to discover that I'm getting anxious and nervous and how to calm myself down. I am exercising much more than I used to, because I found out that physical exercise is what stabilizes your nervous system, among many, many other things.
Sure.
And so my life is great. And so, yeah.
Well, a question for you. You just mentioned the term CRPS. That's complex regional pain syndrome. So when did you receive that diagnosis? Because you were talking about carpal tunnel before.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Yes, so I missed that little curve in my journey. So at some point, finally, I was able to get to beat out of my doctor referral to the physical therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And of all the things that my, at the time, physician was able to provide, physical therapist was the best thing ever. The only thing that actually helped me, and not for the official reasons. Physical therapist ended up being a very smart, incredibly compassionate and intelligent woman. And she really kept me afloat as I was going from one doctor to another doctor. She was the only person who really treated me with compassion and who was really trying to help me, instead of like automatically calculating that, you have carpal tunnel syndrome and that's what we're going to do about you. So she, one day she looked at me and she said, I think I know what you have. And I said, what do you have? What do I have? And she said, well, I think it's called carpal tunnel syndrome. And I had patients like you. And I'm actually
Carpal tunnel or CRPS?
CRPS.
Okay, yeah, you just take
Complex regional pain syndrome. And as I was trying to really solve the puzzle of my condition, I was doing a lot of Google searches. And CRPS came up in my searches, but it was so horrifying that I kind of pushed it away. So I cannot have this thing. And so once I knew that to look deeper into it, I started digging, and yes, she was right. It was CRPS. And then it was very interesting. It happened about the same time that I discovered Dr. Sarno, and I was still going to physical therapists as I was reading Sarno's book. And one day I brought his book to the session, and she looked at me and she said, don't tell anybody. They will think that it's all in your head. And at that point, I thought, well, I didn't really respond at that time, but then I thought, well, you know what? If it is in my head, I can change it. I can control it because I'm a thinking human being. But if it is not in my head, if my body is broken, very little I can do about it. And so, yeah. And so, but as far as CRPS goes, it's a really terrible diagnosis. And just in case people don't know, sometimes it is called a suicide disease.
Nice.
People literally take their lives because they find themselves at the end of their rope. The official diagnosis basically says that it is an incurable condition.
Yeah. A lot of quote unquote conditions are said to be incurable, which is ridiculous because the people saying that are putting this prediction or this prognosis out there that is devastating emotionally and mentally to the people. And then if the brain believes that that's actually true, you're that less likely to actually recover. But fortunately, you were able to go, well, that's one story, but I have this other story stemming with Dr. Sarno, the mind-body connection, the brain creating symptoms. And I don't like that term, it's all in your head, because that leads people to believe it's imaginary. You're making this up. The symptoms aren't real. And you know firsthand how very, 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 very real all of those symptoms are. You know, everything from the swelling to the discoloration, the Raynauds, to the pain, to the lack of mobility, all that stuff really, really happened. The question that Dr. Sarno raises is, what's causing it? And,
exactly.
And in Dr. Sarno's world, it's the brain perceiving these repressed emotions. And in his very first book, he actually didn't talk about repressed emotions at all. He spoke about two things: stress and tension. And that seems to fit with your story based on what you've said. So for the people who go, yeah, but I don't have a lot of childhood trauma. Well, how's your stress and your tension? Are you a people pleaser, do-gooder, hard-driven, perfectionist, got to go, go, go all day long? Or can you sit still at all? And, you know, I don't want people to get too hung up on the repressed negative emotion thing, because that's, in my opinion, only one of the perceived dangers that the brain can trigger symptoms off of. Stress, tension, yes, emotions, but other things too. Work stress, family stress, money stress, self-critical, judgmental thinking about ourselves. Those things feel dangerous to us. Body positions, movements. Once you have pain, you start to learn, I can't do that. I can't open a jar with a lid because my hands don't work. I'm afraid of that. So every time you try, it hurts even more because the brain's going, stop it. Tamara, stop it. You're doing something dangerous, right? And it can grow and multiply, which is why your symptoms seem to manifest bigger and bigger, because your brain was believing we're messed up physically.
Yeah. And the fear, my fear that I was going to lose, that I would have to go on disability, lose my job. I would lose ability to generate income. If I don't have a job and income, how can I afford medical treatments? And especially multiply that by the prospects of incurable condition for the rest of my sort of life. All that, that fear was amplifying every minute in my brain and creating worse and worse and worse symptoms.
Right. Yeah, fear is another word for what I refer to as perceived danger pain. Dr. Sarno termed it TMS, tension myositis syndrome. And even that first word, tension, which equals a lot of it equals stress. But what I've done is I've coined the term perceived danger pain, perceived danger symptoms. And both of those are the response from a brain perceiving danger. The danger is perceived. The symptoms are real, but the danger is what's perceived. And so I'm finding a lot of people grabbing onto that terminology because it makes a lot of sense. It says right what it is right in the label: perceived danger, creating pain or symptoms. Um, so yeah, it's interesting how you pointed out the fear, and fear is just another word for danger.
Yeah. To your point, what I found in my own experience, and then after I recovered, I became, as I was recovering, I became pretty active on a TMS forum, TMS wiki. And by the way, they no longer call it tension myofascial syndrome. They renamed it. It is now called the mind body syndrome,
Right. To make it
which
more generic. Yes.
is way more appropriate. And by the way, I do believe that Dr. Sarno was a genius with that
Me too.
knowledge of neuroscience that existed in common knowledge at that time. He was able to really find a way to explain and interpret what he was observing and find a method for people to get out of the pain. So
I
anyway,
agree. Complete genius.
yes.
And the discovery of his work about 25 years ago completely changed my life. Now, it took me a long time to get better, even though I knew about Dr. Sarno, because I made all sorts of mistakes. But I can say that my experience with back pain and sciatica and finding Dr. Sarno has completely changed my life to the point that that is now my, chosen passion, profession, and the way I help people is based on the foundational work of Dr. Sarno. Now, I've added some other concepts and things, but yeah, Sarno absolutely changed the trajectory of my life in such a way that it couldn't even be, explained. Hey, everybody, don't know what happened right in the middle of my conversation with Tamara. All of a sudden, we got disconnected. I lost my internet for about 4 or 5 minutes. So we're going to just kind of pick up this conversation. I don't know if either of us knows exactly where we left off, but we're going to do our best to just kind of make the rest of this conversation useful for you. So I think what we're going to do is, Tamara, why don't you tell me a little bit more about your CRPS diagnosis and the different types, and let's kind of take up the conversation from there.
Yeah. So CRPS in the world of chronic pain has its own unique place, primarily because it is very complex. And in addition to just invisible pain, it has very visible symptoms. Swelling, changes in the skin, neurological symptoms. People would have involuntary muscle contractions.
Right.
People would start seeing abnormal growth of hair or loss of hair. And it all kind of comes in waves and it starts moving. And to me, that was the best indication that the problem is not in my wrist. When one day I noticed what I was kind of ignoring before, because my hands were giving me so much pain, I started noticing that my ankles and my feet were developing similar symptoms.
Sure.
So at that point, I was 100% convinced it had nothing to do with my carpal tunnel syndrome. The only place where all these symptoms can come is the brain, because it spread into my entire body. And as a matter of fact, that unstoppable onslaught of symptoms and spread of them all over the body is what scares people the most.
Sure.
That they end up in that endless loop of fear. And that leads to more and more symptoms. And what I usually tell people on the TMS forum, that the weirder your symptoms are, the more of them you experience, the more likely what you have is mind-body syndrome.
Yes.
It is generated by your brain, because the brain is the only place that connects to the entire nervous system, and through the entire nervous system, it connects to your entire body.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. So CRPS can develop as a result of injury, but like in my case, it came out of nowhere.
Right.
There was no precipitating injury. And it's about, I think, about 20% cases when CRPS is developed without any injury.
Or
But
or surgery.
or surgery, yeah. Any physical damage
Right.
to the body. What I came to a firm conclusion after observing a number of CRPS cases, that it is not the injury or surgery that is the cause. What happens is that the surgery or injury happened at the time when your nervous system was in the state of complete distress.
Yeah.
And that's when the seed landed in the fertile ground.
Yes.
That's what triggers CRPS. And if you stop looking at the surgery or injury as the cause of it and start looking at your brain as the cause of it, you have a chance to succeed.
I agree.
In my case, it came out of nowhere. So in a way, it was easier for me to believe that it came from my brain. I know people who had surgeries who refused to believe. I had a woman who I met through there is this organization, RSDSA. This is kind of a association of the CRPS sufferers. And so she refused to believe that her pain was absolutely unrelated to the botched surgery. She had 3 botched surgeries.
Sure.
She developed severe anxiety. She had heart palpitations. And she told me, this is systemic. We may fix something, but there is no way we can fix my heart palpitations. I convinced her to try meditation, and not the meditation 3 times a day for 5 minutes as she was doing. Do it my way, which was at least an hour every day, uninterrupted. And she tried that for 6 months. Her heart palpitations disappeared. Her pain subsided. She started getting more physical, more active. And she told me that she could not believe the change that happened.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I never found that meditation was my cure. I did try it. I was always the type of guy who was in my head trying to meditate. Am I doing it right? Is this working? Is this going to fix me? I'm probably not doing it right because I still have my pain. So what, and I just was so in my head, I never felt comfortable that I was doing it right. And then I would go to the bookstore, because this was pre-internet, and go to the bookstore and buy books on meditation. And I'd sit in the bookstore flipping through, and I tried breath work and meditation. I did the whole journaling, emotional discovery type of work. And I never got anywhere with any of that stuff. But my interpretation, if I can kind of translate your meditation experience and the experience of this person, is that the meditation gave your nervous system an opportunity to settle down. And what's the main controller of the nervous system? It's the brain. So it must have been really challenging for you as a go getter to sit and meditate for an hour. How did you work your way through that initial resistance?
I went exactly through what you went. I could not. I've been practicing yoga for 20 some years, and as a yoga practitioner, I could never, I could never really do the most difficult pose in yoga, which is shavasana, when you lie flat on the floor and do nothing. I actually tried a meditation class many years ago. It was so unbearable that I got up and quietly left, knowing really well that it was very rude. I just could not do it.
Right.
And so I tried, I have a stack of different audio recordings and books and how to do meditation and all the rules until, but I was really desperate. I mean, I was
Sure.
at the bottom, like rock bottom, at the lowest point in my life. And then I thought, well, what the heck? I tried sitting cross-legged, by the way. I just couldn't do it because I was in pain. I tried to use guided meditations, whatever. And I finally came up with my method. And my method was follow as few rules as possible, accept your own rule. Do what is good and comfortable for you. So I started just sitting down on the couch. I have, like kids, they have their comfort blanket. I
Mm-hmm.
have my comfort blanket. I put it over myself. I rest my hands, my arms on the pillows, and I close my eyes and I just start following my breath. There are all these methods. You have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. No, I get to 3 and I go, did I do 2 or
Am I
not?
counting too fast? Am I counting too slow?
Yeah, exactly. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Am I counting the right way? Are my feet in the proper position? And then, one of the most popular meditation techniques, body scan. Oh my God, I would just start following my feet and I would get to my knee and I go, did I do the right knee or did I do the left knee? And I would just be stuck, one foot and
Yeah,
then the other foot. Once I disconnected my brain, like you said, and I just sit and I follow my breath. And that's it. And the thoughts come in and the mind starts racing. And I just go, well, it's okay. It's okay. You mentioned mistakes. Well, the thing is that making mistakes is the most human thing that we can do. So acknowledge, yeah, I made a mistake, but I can learn from it and I can move on. So I made a mistake. I went with that thought, but what the heck? I can go back to my breath. And in the beginning, I couldn't sit for more than 5-10 minutes. And then it was more and more and more. And then the miracle happened. Why start doing meditation? On one of the CRPS forums that were full conversations about the horrific medications, the surgeries, the amputations. By the way, people actually beg for amputations because they think that if they cut off their affected limb, the pain would go away. Well, they end up with the phantom limb syndrome,
yeah,
and pain is still there. So anyway, on one of those forums, among all that horrific exchange of methods that people get butchered with, somebody mentioned that meditation makes them feel better. And so, well, I can try. It doesn't cost me anything, doesn't have any side effects. Why not?
yeah.
And so I discovered, but they also said that maybe they said, or somebody somewhere else, I saw them mentioning that meditation has to be at least 20 minutes. And this is what I discovered. To really have a healing therapeutic effect, meditation has to last at least 20-30 minutes. And as a matter of fact, if you can sit for more than 45 minutes, and I ended up sometimes an hour and a half effortlessly, you get into the flow. You finally find yourself in a state of that inner peace. And then there is another thing, about 10, 15 minutes into meditation. And the more I meditate, the less pronounced that period is. I start feeling rise in anxiety. This is what precludes people from actually sticking with meditation, because at some point, your body revolts against it because you're so used to being jittery, you're so used to be on the go that you cannot bear that state of peace. And you start feeling rise of anxiety that can manifest in many different things. You may feel, oh, I need to check my email, or somebody might be calling you, oh, I need to take care of this, I need to take care of that. All that stream of consciousness just starts pouring into your head.
True.
What you need to do is go back to your breath. It's like a surfer breaking through the surf break. Once you get through it, where the waves are really scary, you find yourself out there in the quiet sea, in the peace. And that's how meditation really worked for me. What was also interesting, I never saw the results of meditation the same day, but the following day, all of a sudden, my pain level dropped.
Yeah. So meditation was never part of my solution, which is why I don't teach it, because I think it's kind of hypocritical for me to teach something that, number one, I never really got good at. Number two, was not a part of my solution. But number three, I got better anyway. So in my opinion, it wasn't a required element of getting better. A lot of what I do is knowledge, training, education, because, boy, if you can really understand how this system works and understand that the brain and the perception of danger is creating the symptom more so than any body problem, what happens to your fear level and the perception of danger comes way down. So that's a message of safety. What you did was you utilized this method called meditation, which in my opinion was a really good regular message of safety to your brain, saying, I'm okay. Look, I'm breathing comfortably. I'm not counting. I'm not doing anything weird. I'm just sitting, resting, not judging my thoughts. They're coming, they're going, not assuming that certain thoughts are bad and mistakes and it, right? And I think at least my interpretation from what you've told me is that your meditation turned into a very good, consistent practice of teaching your brain, I'm okay. But underlying that, you had the foundational knowledge of Sarno going, your body's okay. You're really okay. So you had both. You had the safety,
Yes.
You had the knowledge, which even though, Tamara admitted that she didn't know who I was until after she had recovered, which is wonderful because that just shows there's, all roads lead to Rome. As long as you're on the right path, that your brain's creating it, and that teaching your brain that you're okay with whatever methods you use is the solution, you can get there too, whether you listen to me or 10 other people or just kind of find your own practice. But I think it's really important to just kind of connect the dots that, you figured out your own method, and everybody's kind of got to figure out their own stuff. I teach a certain way of conveying safety to the brain. Starts with accurate knowledge. What's causing it? Does it apply to me? Right? Is there a solution? Yes, I'm proof. You're proof. And are you capable of doing it? And initially you were like, I can't do this meditation stuff. Oh my God. That it cracked me up when you told me that you couldn't lay on the floor quiet, which was the most difficult yoga pose you could imagine. But yet you were probably doing all sorts of semi-acrobatic things, which is, I found that pretty funny, but telling, because it just really showed where your brain and nervous system was, that the concept of laying still was uncomfortable and almost infuriating. Is that accurate?
It's absolutely accurate. It is absolutely accurate. And I think there are really, from my observation, there are really three ways that people recover from chronic pain or mind-body syndrome or whatever else you call it.
Sure.
There is one way, and that is shock. Basically, people say, well, whatever pain it is, I have to get through it. And I actually know 2 CRPS cases when people basically said, I got to get through it, and I will, and somehow pain eventually went away. But this is like a hammer or axe kind of a method. The second method is classic Sarno method. And there are different variations, right? There is one, just go find your childhood trauma, which I couldn't do. I never found that one smoking gun. Neither did you, right? And but there is education, understanding that it is the brain that generates basically Dan's method, right? And then there is that third method, which taps into the nervous system, because at the end, at the foundation, is our sympathetic nervous system that generates all of that anxiety, stress, all these symptoms, right, that lead to chronic pain. I tapped into my sympathetic nervous system through meditation. There are a couple other methods out there that people use that tap into the same sympathetic nervous system in a different way. The tapping, I don't know if people know about tapping.
Oh, I'm aware of it. I'm experimenting with that as well, and
EFT,
didn't find it working for me, but I know some people speak highly.
I tried that. Didn't work for me. EMDR, emotional, eye movements, desensitization did not work for me. And so, but it's a different way. And I do believe that every person needs to find their own way. And people can give you pointers, and they can give you different options that you can try. And I would imagine when you work with people, you basically tell them, find your own way, because each one of us is unique.
Yeah, what's interesting is a lot of people hear about this mind-body concept and they get really excited, and without hesitating, they jump into practices. Let me journal, let me meditate, let me go to therapy, let me do EMDR, let me do tapping, let me do you name it. But in my opinion, a lot of times what is missing is a foundational acceptance or knowledge of what's going on in the first place. And I don't care how good of a meditator you are. If you think your body's all messed up, it's going to be really hard to convince this scared, hyped up brain and nervous system to settle down symptoms if your core belief is my body's messed up, right? So I think the foundational knowledge is key. And you were blessed to have had this acupressurist recommend it not once, but twice. And again, you hit that wall, you hit that level of desperation where you're like, all right, I'll look at it. Where a lot of people will say, this is hogwash, and they throw it away. Or I don't have back pain, they throw it away, and they never revisit it, which is such a shame. But it's really not about the techniques. It's more about the accurate knowledge, the foundational knowledge that, holy crap, my brain is doing this based on, in my words, the perception of danger. Sarno thought the repressed emotions were the threat, right? But I think there's a lot of potential threats that the brain is interpreting inaccurately. I think a lot of this chronic pain or chronic symptoms are really a mistake made by the brain, a misperception. And I think your brain and nervous system was working and still is working perfectly. It was just amped up at this level due to misinformation and fear. You talked about the fear loop several times. And that's where we get, because it's terrifying to be able to look at a hand and go, I can't open my hand. I have swelling. I have discoloration, whether it be the whiteness. I know a lot of people with CRPS experience reddish and looking like bruises. And there's all this, like you said, physicality to this diagnosis of CRPS, which makes it more challenging to say, okay, all these things are real, but it's not caused by a flaw in the body. So I love the techniques. And this has actually been very good for me to hear you explain your journey through meditation and how it benefited you, because I think that'll be very useful for my audience. It's very useful for me, actually, because, I beat my head against the wall trying it. And I eventually said, this isn't working. I don't know how to do this. And so that's wonderful that you persisted and found the magic, found the gold.
The reason I persisted was because I tried everything else. I tried journaling, I tried EMDR, I tried EFT, I tried just about anything. And somehow that was the only thing that I found working for me. But I I just want to make a couple points.
Yeah,
I
please.
think your definition of perceived
Danger.
danger is right on point, because the perceived danger is actually incredibly subjective. And one of the things that people can do in their exploration, like for myself, I found that I have higher than average sense of danger. There are people, there is this even term, sensitive people with oversensitive nervous system. These are people whose sense of danger is higher than average. So you have to really make that mental adjustment,
Yeah.
that what you find potentially dangerous is your overreaction, that the real danger is not as high as you believe it is.
Correct.
And for example, people who have a fear of heights, the most effective method dealing with it is visualization and desensitization. When people kind of walk themselves through the potentially dangerous situation where they are high up on whatever mountain or whatever they fear, and then eventually it desensitizes the nervous system, so that perception does not correlate with reality. And once you bring your perception down to reality, the fear starts going away.
Right.
And then as far as repressed emotions are, one of the things that I noticed as I was really taking a deep dive into myself, thanks to Dr. Sarno, I realized that I actually got to the point that I didn't have any emotions. I did not feel anything
Wow.
except for fear and anxiety.
Mhm.
And I was just frozen.
Yeah.
And what I understand is repressed emotions are the result of suppressed emotions, because in my go lifestyle, I decided that I cannot allow myself deal with emotions, because it stopped me in my tracks. And eventually, by constantly suppressing all of my emotions, I got to the point that they were repressed. The anger, the basically whatever good emotions we have disappeared. And as I went through meditation, I realized that my emotions came back.
Sure.
And I see that on the forum. I see people often talk about how they can't find any emotions.
Hmm.
That's the result of you consciously suppressing them, and then they become repressed, and you really need to unfreeze your nervous system
Sure.
through whatever means you find to get into it.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting thought. Um, I think the brain's two primary functions: safety and survival, period. End of story. If the brain perceives emotions to be dangerous, locks them up, right? And I think the brain also prioritizes things. So if our conscious thoughts are really driving a lot of the conscious fear, that fear loop that we really get stuck in, the brain's going to say, sadness, that's not important. Look, we're in trouble. We got all this fear. And so automatically the sadness, the anger, the whatever other emotions are occurring are not a priority, because your brain's going, well, we're in trouble. We've got this massive fear. We've got this massive problem. Look at our body. And so it's like, yeah, you're sad about something, but your brain's going, who cares? We got a problem. So I think that leads to oftentimes subconscious repression, suppression. Those terms are somewhat similar. Some of it is conscious and some of it is unaware to us. But I think it's all driven by, the fear level. So if your brain is really up here and highly vigilant, always looking out for danger, the only thing that's important to the brain is keeping you alive. And if you're in that much trouble, your brain's going, this is our priority. And it happens that way for happy emotions too.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've had people say, I'm sitting on the floor with my 4-year-old daughter, and I can't find any joy in that whatsoever. None, not an ounce. And I say, well, it makes sense because your fear is so high, consciously and subconsciously, that your brain's going, happiness, we're in trouble. What do you mean
Exactly.
happy? So it's really important for anybody who's struggling to feel both positive or negative emotions, that if you're really in that deep fear loop, consciously and even subconsciously, those emotions are not going to be available to you. That doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you've got an emotional problem. It doesn't mean you need 16 years of therapy or 18 pills a day. It just means that you're in a state, I use the word chaos. And for you were blessed that the meditation pulled you out of chaos and gave you enough safety per day that your whole system started going, because your brain came to this logical conclusion. Well, if she can sit for 20, 30, 45, 60, 90 minutes a day, calmly just focusing on her breath, there can't really be much danger, because otherwise she wouldn't be able to do that. And so just naturally, your brain came to the conclusion that, wow, Tamara is safe. She's actually okay. And it resolved. Interesting story. I actually know a gentleman who probably in his 30s was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and also MS. He had many of the classic symptoms of multiple sclerosis, walking with a cane, shakes, all that kind of stuff. And through not finding any solutions, he ended up learning about mindfulness meditation. And he literally was able to reverse his MS diagnosis and his bipolar diagnosis, which are both two fairly heavy diagnoses to get, through a practice of regular deep meditation. So I'm not the meditation guy, because I didn't experience that, that solution there. And I'm blessed that even without teaching meditation, a lot of my viewers, audience, coaching clients, through the method of knowledge and safety, are still getting better because they're coming up with different ways of teaching the brain we're safe. Meditation is a tool. It's a useful tool for some, for many. But there are other roads that lead to Rome, right?
Exactly.
And the key is safety.
Find your road.
Yeah,
Find your road. Be brave.
yeah,
Be
absolutely.
brave, be creative, be resourceful,
Yeah.
and believe, because doubt is what kills many people's road to recovery. Um, I run this website that was started with my partner Rita, defeatcrps.com, and this is for people with CRPS, because this is like the most desperate condition of chronic pain that is possible to find out there. So I have this young man from Australia who reached out to us, and every few weeks I get an email from him. It's like a circular coming back with the same thing: doubt, doubt. He starts getting, somewhat stabilizing, and then boom, he's in doubt. Each time he looks at his foot, the doubt creeps up. And so can't break out of the doubt. He would get better and he would get worse, better and worse.
I see that a lot as well.
Yeah.
Which is why I did a video recently about developing unshakable belief. And the real core foundational thing is understanding what's going on and making a decision, a commitment that this is what's going on with me. And I'm not going to waver from that. I'm not going to jump back into the doubt swimming pool. So it really starts with accurate knowledge and a decision to say, this is what's going on with me.
That's what I did. Essentially, I kept telling myself, honey, you tried all other roads. You have nowhere else to go. Dr. Sarno is the only one who shows you the way out of it. So just stick through it. Be patient.
Yeah, brilliant.
It took me 2 extremely long years.
Wow. And you've been well for how long now?
6 years.
Love it. That's awesome. So go ahead.
Very important for people to know. This does not mean that I never had any symptoms. I have occasional symptoms that break out.
Huh?
I all of a sudden developed neuropathy in my foot when I was going through a pretty stressful period in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I knew about mind, body, and pain and all that, it actually, after a while, I actually decided that it was something was wrong with my foot.
Something new. So that brings up an excellent point. For anybody who gets well, some people say, this is great. I beat it. I'll never have any symptoms again, which is a myth. It's a wish. It would be lovely, but it's not really the reality. You're completely recovered when you're able to get a new symptom at some point down the road, whether it be months or years, and go, I know what that is. I'm not going to buy into the fear. I'm not going to get stuck in that loop. I'm not going to get stuck into the medical machine again. I am going to say, I know what that is, and I know what to do about it, which is the same exact thing I did for all the other symptoms that were gone. And the sooner we approach a brand new symptom with that level of calm and certainty that we know what it is, the sooner that symptom goes away. Unfortunately, like you had to experience, you kind of get brought back into into that fear loop for a while. And we start doubting that, well, I beat that, so this has to be something different. No, it's probably the same exact thing. And if you can connect the dots and say, really stressful time, new symptom, okay, pay attention. That's what's going on, right? So for you and for anybody watching, try not to let any recurrence of old symptoms or appearance of new symptoms throw you, because inevitably it's most likely the same. Now, I will caution, if something feels imminent, life-threatening, harmful, dangerous, breathing, heart, go to the hospital, right? Do yourself a favor and make sure you're ruling out the significant life impacting stuff. But once you've done that, you can kind of look back and go, well, this kind of fits in with my experience. So I'm going to take an approach that says, I'm good. I'm actually okay because I know what it is. So,
Yeah.
brilliant example of part of the journey, right? Because you
Right.
thought you were smooth sailing, and all of a sudden here comes a symptom, and it's like, oh, I just hit a speed bump, right? And how long did it take you to figure out that it was really more of the same?
So it was very interesting. I'm a hiker, and I was supposed to go on the long backpacking trip in the mountains. And all of a sudden, 2 weeks before the trip, my foot starts hurting, and it's really like I really, I go on a training hike 5 miles, and all of a sudden I have a very difficult time walking. And so $500 $500 on the chiropractor later, I'm ready to start the hike. And every day I have to walk with a backpack 10 miles in the mountains. And I just can't. I really cannot do that. And I said, well, I'll give it a try. And so day one, I was in pain. Day two, I'm like, where's my pain? Day three, I completely forgot about it. So one of the three methods, which is shock, psychoanalysis, or neuroscientific approach, the shock was the method that worked that time. I had to do it, and I just started walking, and guess what? The pain went away.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been, and it was 2 years ago. What was that? Year and a half ago. Yeah. And so the pain disappeared. It surfaced a little bit a couple times, but then it went away. I just keep walking.
Yeah. I often tell people avoidance delays recovery. Because had you decided, okay, I'm going to quit hiking, I'm going to sit here with my foot up on the ottoman, and that's all I'm going to do until I figure this out or until it goes away, what you would be doing is confirming the brain's perception that there's something wrong with the foot and walking is dangerous. Um, so what you did was you just said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And, one of the things I say often is you need to be willing to experience the pain or the symptoms in order to eliminate them, because it's during that experience of the symptoms that you actually can teach your brain something useful, productive, leading to recovery. Because by avoiding walking and hiking, you're still teaching your brain something, but you're teaching your brain, I'm messed up. I got a problem. Look at my foot. And the brain will perpetuate the symptoms because you've taught the brain that, yeah, that walking, hiking stuff is dangerous. So it's tough. I don't advocate for people legitimately torturing themselves to prove a point. Um, I think your fear level at that point was more mild and not really freaking you out. I'm not saying you didn't have fear, but just judging from our conversation, your decision to hike anyway was based on a fact like, okay, I'm going to go do this, as opposed to, I'm terrified I can't leave the house. Cancel the plans, right? Am I accurate in that assumption?
Yeah, it is push and pull. Sometimes you push and you realize, well, it's too much. I have to pull back.
Yeah.
But as long as you do not allow yourself to give in and surrender and just throw your towel in, and continue coming back and pushing and trying, you will succeed eventually. And I would say that the bravest thing we can do in our lives is to confront our fears. And there is this, petite young woman by name Simone Biles,
Okay.
who is an amazing hero, because a year ago she faced insurmountable problem. Her brain refused to cooperate. And everybody thought, Simone, you quit your career, professional gymnast, and you still go away as a hero. Guess what? She confronted her fears, she dealt with it, and she came back with an amazing achievement after that.
Yeah.
And this is what um, really the way to deal with it, the bravest thing we can do is understand our fears and learn how to deal with them.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me the question, Dan, how do I get rid of the fear? How do I get rid of the fear? How do I get rid of the fear? And my stock answer is like accurate knowledge, know what's going on so you don't have to be afraid of it. But sometimes the answer to how do I overcome my fear is be more brave. Feel the fear and do it anyway is a common statement. And you're right, it's a push and pull. You're finding your balance because if you go too hard, too fast, your brain's going to go, stop it, alarm system,
Yep.
which can cause more fear. So there's a balance and there's an easing into things. So I'm thrilled with your story. It's been fascinating. I've really enjoyed this conversation, but we're running a little bit long here. So
Yeah.
we're going to have to wrap it up. But I know Tamara mentioned to me before we started recording, not only her website, defeatcrps.com, but she's also written a book about CRPS. And so if you'd like to mention the title and tell people where they can get it, whether it be your website.
Yeah, so this is the book. It's called
Defying the Verdict.
Defying the Verdict. You can find it on Amazon. I self-published it. And you can find it through the website. It's also listed on the website. And it is really to help people to get through CRPS and letting them know that it is not the end of life. It is not a terminal condition. It is curable. Well, I don't know if it's curable because curing means applying some medication. You can heal from it.
You can reverse the symptoms.
You can, it is fully reversible.
Is
It
that
is fully
curing? Is it
reversible.
really healing, or is it just reversing the symptoms by addressing the root cause, which is a scared brain? So I
And
don't.
as a matter of fact, it was one of the people who reached out to us through the website and said, "Why do you know of Dan Poglo and his podcast?" And I said, "Well, you know, I heard about him. Why don't you go on his podcast and tell your story? People need to know."
Awesome. And it's great because I did a video on CRPS. I did have a CRPS success story not that long ago. And it's been one of those areas that I didn't have a ton of experience with in my coaching clients, success stories. So I'm thrilled to have another person who was given that diagnosis, overcame it, some fascinating discussions about your path and how the meditation was initially like major resistance to it. And you kind of figured out your own way of doing it without following the rules and the counting and the breath work and all this weird stuff. Because I think if we try to fix ourselves too hard, all we're doing is confirming the brain's belief that we're broken. Look at all the weird stuff we're doing. All you were doing was relaxing and watching your breath,
Exactly.
which is not a fixing activity. It's like, I'm going to chill out instead of doing 16 things professionally or around the house.
It actually was very hard to do.
I get it, especially saying how hard driven you were. So listen, Tamara, I really appreciate you. This was a really, really good conversation.
Thank you.
So it'll probably take several days to a week to get this recording kind of put together and out the door. But keep an eye on my YouTube channel,
Absolutely.
dansyoutube.com. You'll see it post. And I really
Thank
appreciate you
you.
sharing the story. It's really going to help a lot of people.
Thank you very much. Thank you for what you're doing. And thank you. It was a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, it was fun.
Very interesting. And best of luck to you and your viewers. And
Wonderful.
we need to defeat CRPS.
And you're helping us do that. So brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. I appreciate you.